Hello, everyone. My name is Jennifer Gibson. I am Director Curator of Gallery 1CO3, which is the campus art gallery of the University of Winnipeg. It's my pleasure to welcome you to today's talk with Heidi McKenzie. This event is presented in conjunction with Heidi's exhibition Reclaimed, Indo-Caribbean Her Stories, which is on view at Gallery 1CO3 until April 25th. Reclaimed is a mixed media ceramic-based exhibition that illuminates the power, courage, and strength of Indo-Caribbean women, past and present. Through a feminist lens, Reclaimed narrates the little-known histories of Indo-indentureship in the mid-19th and early 20th centuries. Using photographic portraiture on ceramics, both archival and contemporary, Heidi's work draws in the visual narrative of the women's Indo-indentured jewelry as symbolic of strength, courage, and resistance. It is an act of reclamation and decolonization. Before we continue, I would like to acknowledge that I am speaking to you from the University of Winnipeg, which is on Treaty 1 territory, the homeland of the Red River Métis and the ancestral lands of the Anishinaabe, Innu, Anisinainu, Dakota Oyate, and Denisulene. I give gratitude for our water, which is from Shoal Lake 40 First Nation on Treaty 3 territory. In giving this land acknowledgement, I want to take a moment to acknowledge the difficult times in which we find ourselves and what we are witnessing at this time. I want to express solidarity with those near and far who have experienced and are continuing to experience the violence of colonization and the incursion of human rights violations, whether that relates to one's sex, gender, race, culture, class, or ability. I would like to express my sincere thanks to Heidi McKenzie for presenting her work at Gallery 1CO3, which gives our community an opportunity to learn about and discuss stories that are not well known or talked about very often. By foregrounding imagery related to Indo-Caribbean women and their labor, past and present, she uplifts their stories and asserts their power. If you live nearby, I strongly encourage you to see Heidi's exhibition in person at Gallery 1CO3. I also want to extend my appreciation to Shanila Boodoo, who has written an astute contextual essay responding to Heidi's work. Following today's talk, I encourage you to visit our website, which is uwinnipeg.ca/art-gallery, where you can read Shanila's impactful text. And to further your understanding of the exhibition, I also urge you to consult the associated library guide. We are grateful to University librarian Danielle Bitts for preparing this important resource that's affiliated with the exhibition. Today's talk would not be possible without the sponsorship of the University of Winnipeg Department of Women's and Gender Studies. We specifically acknowledge the support of the Margaret Lawrence Endowment Fund community grants, and I wish to thank Women's and Gender Studies Department Chair and Associate Professor Dr. Sharon Paul Ruprai for moderating today's event and her students for attending as well. Okay, so now on to our format. Dr. Sharon Paul Ruprai will introduce the artist, and then Heidi will speak for about 45 minutes. Then we will be open to questions from the audience. So I encourage you to submit your questions to the Q&A, which is, I believe it's a button at the bottom of your screen. You can do that at any time. A couple of housekeeping items. We have ASL interpretation today and captioning. So thanks to Jennifer Horvath and Accessibility Services for providing this important service of ASL interpretation. This event is being recorded and it will be made available on Gallery 1CO3's YouTube playlist in about a week's time. It is now my pleasure to introduce our moderator, Dr. Sharon Paul Ruprai. Dr. Ruprai is, as I mentioned, Chair of Women's and Gender Studies Department at the University of Winnipeg, where she is an associate professor. An award-winning writer of poetry and prose, Dr. Ruprai's teaching and research interests include Indigenous and critical race feminism, religious and cultural studies, and artistic practice. Specifically, her work explores the intersection of religion, gender, violence, and identity within the context of the Canadian South Asian women's experience. So now over to you, Sharon Paul.
Thank you. I bring greetings from my class here at the University of Winnipeg. I will introduce Heidi McKenzie. My class was able to visit Gallery 1CO3 last week, and they are waiting to ask questions of the artist. So Heidi McKenzie is a ceramics and installation artist based in Toronto. Heidi completed her Master of Fine Arts degree at the Ontario College of Art and Design University in 2014. She is informed by her mixed race, Indo-Trinidadian, Irish American heritage. Heidi uses ceramics, photograph, digital media, and archive to forefront themes of ancestry, race, migration, colonization, as well as body and healing. Heidi's exhibition has exhibited internationally in Europe, Scandinavia, Asia, Oceania, and North America. The recipient of numerous grants, Heidi has created work in Ireland, Denmark, Hungary, Australia, China, and Indonesia. Her art has been collected by the Royal Ontario Museum, which is a huge deal. Global Affairs Canada and the Canadian Clay and Glass Gallery, amongst others. We wish to welcome Heidi. Welcome back. The students are ready for your presentation. Thank you, Heidi.
Okay. Thank you very much, Professor Sharon Paul Ruprai. I am just going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay.
See if this all works.
How's that? Are you seeing me?
Yes.
Okay, and I just need to reposition that, and I'm good to go. Slide. I want to start by thanking Gallery 1C03 at the University of Winnipeg, and especially to Jennifer Gibson for inviting me to do this critical work and exhibit this exhibition in Winnipeg at the University of Winnipeg. And thank you again to Sharon Paul Ruprai. I want to thank the Canada Council for the Arts for supporting the creation of the Illuminated series, and the Toronto Arts Council for supporting the creation of the exhibition, and the Ontario Arts Council for supporting the travel, in part, of shipping the work to Winnipeg. So I just want to say that I'm going to jump around a bit in terms of time, because there's a particular story that I want to tell over these next 40 minutes. So bear with me. And what I wanted to start with is very briefly the story of Indo-indentureship in the Caribbean, what I like to call 101. Because it is a little known story, I cannot presume that everyone here joining us this afternoon will be aware of this story. So the British abolished slavery in the early 1830s, and the slaves were working the plantations, largely the sugar crops, but also banana, cocoa, coffee, pineapple. And they needed a workforce. And after trying a few different folks out, they settled on the Indians. And approximately approximately 500,000, came from India to the West Indies between 1838 and 1917. Let's see. Now, fun fact, when they were shopping around for peoples and they tried out the Portuguese and Chinese and the Scottish, and the Irish, they settled on the Indians. One of the reasons is because it's largely a Hindu population, not wholly, but largely vegetarian. And at the time, Canada was a colony and provided cheap source of grains to feed the population. I just found that out. I thought I'd throw that in. Indentureship is really actually the act of signing a contract, and the contract was for 5 years, sometimes 10, if you wanted to if you wanted to return to your home country, you would do an additional 5 years. And the population would put an X on the contract, and in exchange for their lodgings and a few shillings and reaching their quota of cutting the cane, they were given a parcel of land at the end of the 5 years to farm or return home. And I'm just going to say that about 10 to 30% of the people who came on the ships, and this is a lovely image of in Calcutta, boarding the small vessels to make it to the larger ships to then travel on the 2 to 3 month voyage to the Caribbean. Okay. Now, this is the image that really shifted where I was headed with my artistic and creative practice. It's a photograph of my great-great-grandmother, Runia, on my paternal line, my father's paternal line. And a cousin had brought the image and the photograph of what was written on the back of the photograph with her after her father's funeral in 2011. And that's when I first saw this image. And it really made me start to think about who is this woman? And really, I had not at that time, I had not really spent a great deal of time thinking about my father's ancestral past and who they were. So you can see, you can read that yourself, but it's also interesting that great-grandmother too, and there's a list of people, and that my father is not on that list, probably because he left the country in 1953 to come to Canada, and some of his siblings are on that list because they would have been around. So I guess I was. Sorry?
Can you read a couple of sentences from here?
Can I read a couple of sentences from here?
From the photograph?
Sure. Runia immigrated from Allahabad, India, by ship, the Golden South, from Calcutta to New Amsterdam, which is the capital of Guyana, Berbice, which is a state, and Guyana, indentured to Master Springlands. Married, we believe it's Rashidin or Mashidin of Afghanistan, which, by the way, we have subsequently proven to be false and just mythology. Mother of Aladai, Kododai, Minty, Jadu. Jadu is my great-grandfather. So then it lists the heritage there, and just to let you know that Jadu Machidini left Guyana for Trinidad, and in fact, Runia and her husband converted from low caste, untouchable caste to Islam, and Jadu rejected Islam, went to Trinidad. Jadu Machidini became James McKenzie. My father, Charles McKenzie, my father, Joseph McKenzie, my grandfather, Charles McKenzie, and myself, Heidi McKenzie. So there you go. So I finished my MFA in 2014 at OCAD University, and I'm very interested in troubling the notion of mixed race identity and Caribbean identity. And at the time, I actually could not find artists of mixed Indo-Caribbean heritage to curate. So I worked with the Black female body mixed artists from the Caribbean in this for my thesis project. Just put that in because it's interesting that it's, again, so little known and so little visibility. And then in my journey, shortly after that, I came across, I first read Gayatri Bahadur's Coolie Woman. It's a book that I had seen around. It's a fairly dense book. It's difficult to get into, but having seen Runia, I absorbed the whole thing, and Gayatri Bahadur's great grandmother has a very similar story to mine, or how I could imagine Runia's being, and it was a transformative experience. And then I started reaching out to people that I knew in the community or knew of, and just started meeting with, talking to, and getting to know the academic Caribbean community, the authors, the artists, the poets, the novelists, and met Amar Wahab, who's written this very pivotal book around the harsh reality of the lived experience in Trinidad at the time of indentureship. And I really started to understand that lived experience. And it was Professor Amar Wahab at York University, who lent me a rather large ring binder of his own personal collection of these postcards that he had accumulated over the years. Um, and that's when I found out about the Coolie Bell collection. And even I became even more engaged. And that's when I really felt moved to make art. And I'm starting here because one of these pieces is at Gallery 1CO3 at the moment. And these are, I have a couple of images. So just notice while I'm going through the image, the jewelry, the adornment on these women, how they're dressed. And you can see that they're staged. It was Western photographers who came from France and Britain, and they plucked these women out of the plantations and they staged them and they photographed them and they anonymized them. They took away their identity, they took away their sense of agency, and they exoticized them and they objectified them. So these were used as postcards to entice Western travelers at that time, around the turn of the century, to travel to the exotic, beautiful West Indies. So this was clearly not an okay history. Well, it was a history of extractivism and colonial erasure, and one that I wanted to push back against. And so this series became reality, where I really wanted to shed light on these women's lives. And so here they are, the Coolie Bell postcards. And these are hand-pressed porcelaneous stoneware, actually, with images fired on. And it just so happens that the iron oxide in a image transfer fired onto ceramics fires with this beautiful sepia tone, which suggests archive. And I really exploited that and played with that. And I made a set over a few years. I made a set of 15, which I call illuminated. And there's various sizes. And this is a shot from Gallery 1CO3 of the installation of 6 of these illuminated works. And these are 3 that were recently acquired by the Royal Ontario Museum. Thank you to Dipali Devan. So the exhibition is a remount. It was first created for the Gardner Museum in Toronto. And this is one of the feature installations in the show. There are 10 portraits of 10 Indo-Caribbean Canadian women, all of us living in the GTA area, and all of us holding an ancestor. You're going to see a few shots of that, so I'll just move forward. When I was given the opportunity to do this exhibition, I really wanted to put everything I could think of about indentureship into one show. And the curator, Sequoia Miller, asked me to really focus my thoughts and what did I really want to say. And I really knew what I needed to say was I wanted to bring voice to women, and to look at these women, and all coming from having been really excited, and my imagination inspired or ignited by the photograph of Runia. So there are a couple of shots. Here's a shot of Jennifer doing the augmented reality. So I also wanted to actually give voice, not metaphorically give voice. And I interviewed these women myself, just on my iPhone. I'm not a filmmaker. And I got some help to edit them into little 2.5 to 3 minute videos where they locate themselves and name their ancestor. They chose their dress, they chose their location, they had agency. So through a free app, Artivive, you can point your smartphone or tablet at these portraits and hear the stories. You can also find them online. And it was really important for me to find a broad range of people. I didn't just go out and grab all my friends. Not that I really had that many Indo-Caribbean female friends, to be honest. I'm going to, in a moment, show you like a section of a couple of clips. But these are the women, and I particularly wanted to have somebody in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. I achieved that. I had women from all walks of life, from from uh, let's see, from sorry. Yes, so we have some cat bombing going on. Sorry about that. Had women from all walks of life, from roti makers to gay pride activists to real estate agents to philanthropists. And all right, let me just show you. Okay. I'm going to show you, this slide is actually my cousin, Ramabai Espinay, who's a novelist and professor emeritus in Caribbean Studies at the University of Toronto. I'm going to show you about the first minute and 20 seconds, and she's going to tell you her own story.
My name is Ramabai Espinay. I'm a writer and educator. I was born in Trinidad and came to Montreal in Canada in the late 60s. My grandmother is Christina Duque. She was a Bible woman, and what that means is someone who works with missionaries, at any rate in Trinidad, Canadian missionaries who sought to convert Indians from Hinduism to Christianity. Their faith was Presbyterian, so there are a lot of Presbyterians among the Indian community in Trinidad. And my grandmother's main interest was education. Conversion led to education. And she worked tirelessly to persuade Indian parents to allow their children to be converted and to begin to be educated in the Presbyterian schools that the missionaries had established. My grandmother was very dear to me. I always called her Mama, and I went with my Mama everywhere she would take me. She was never tired of my chatter, and I chatted all the time with her. She was very dear to me, and I lost her at the early age of 5.
Oh,
My name.
oh, there we go. I just wanted to give you another example of one of the stories. I just find them so compelling. And this is Lancelyn Raymond Waters, and it's Lancelyn who donated the jewelry for the exhibition at the Gardner Museum. And I'm going to let her tell you a little bit of her story and her mother's story as to why and how she has the jewelry. And I'm not sure whether I'm going to be able to advance it to where I want.
I'm Lancelyn 19.
I wanted to go to, okay, hang on. Yeah, right
He
there.
was her beloved child.
There we go.
This is a picture of Esther. As you can see, she was quintessentially a brown Victorian woman, but she never lost her interest in things Indian. In fact, this picture shows her daughter Irene and daughter-in-law dressed in Indian saris and jewelry, although at the time they wore Victorian clothes. My mother married my father Lance, and together they built Raymond's drugstore. In other words, my mother followed in the footsteps of Esther by becoming a businesswoman. My mother, Evelyn, was, like Esther Mahadio, not exactly a traditional Indo-Guyanese woman. My mother was brave, strong, and didn't give a damn about what other people thought of her. She would wear the sari to functions where they weren't usually worn, and in fact, she wore Western garb during the day. She learned to drape the sari properly and also wore Indian jewelry, not usually done at top end things. In the 50s, she started collecting Indian peasant jewelry, which was being smashed up, melted, and exported to Britain for its silver content. That happened because East Indians in Guyana generally did not want to be associated with their past connections to indentureship, which had been harsh. Unfortunately, most of my mother's irreplaceable collection was destroyed in the Georgetown riots during 1962 when the town was set ablaze essentially. Happily, a few pieces still remain.
Okay. So I think Lance, sorry, I think Lancelyn did a very good job of explaining that. And we're going to come back and talk a little bit more about the jewelry. Just going to show you some shots of the installation at the Gardner Museum behind the cases with the jewelry. And these are sculptures that are abstractions of the jewelry. And this is an installation shot at Gallery 1CO3. This is the jewelry that we selected, from which we selected to use, and the Gardner, and just a few more installation shots. So by this point, we're talking a lot about jewelry, and you're probably wondering why. This is and I'm going to tell you in a minute, but just to explain to you what this is, this is a set of 20 multiples, and it's a close-up abstraction of the bangle pieces. And you just saw Lancelyn with those cuffs. That was an invention of the West Indies, because they wore them working in the fields, and they had them fabricated like cuffs all in one, because multiple bangles would have been really difficult to to work the fields with. And these bulbous silver shapes on the bangles were imitating pearls because they didn't have pearls. And faceted shapes would have been imitating jewels and diamonds because they didn't have them. And this piece is the crescent moon. And some of the jewelry and some of the workers were of Islamic descent, and some of them were from Afghanistan. Just so happens that it wasn't true that my family was, but there were some. And this is an important Islamic symbol that is on some of the jewelry. And this is what I call coinage. And I don't know if you remember, but I said, please take a look and look at the coin necklaces. So literally the women were wearing their earnings on their body. They were illiterate. They couldn't access the banking system. And they had their shillings fashioned into jewelry, and they wore it on their bodies. So, okay. Here's another Coolie Bell postcard showing a lot of the jewelry. And I then translated some of the ephemera and the postcards, both front and back, and photography onto porcelain panes, because they are in a window frame, and they're on both sides. And you can walk around, and this set of work is called Looking Back, and kind of reflect on these women and where they came from and how they were used or commodified in the industry. Okay, so I'm going to really quickly give you a little bit of history of my practice and how I came to this work in the next few minutes. I thought I'd start with a couple of the pieces that were my thesis work at Sheridan. And many artists do start, and I began looking at representation of self. And I have always been someone who's attracted to abstraction as opposed to realism. Um, and this is a portrait of myself and my lived experience of living with fibromyalgia for about 20 years, which I am very happy to tell you I no longer live with. Um, and this is a family portrait. And as Jennifer mentioned in the introduction, I come from a very mixed family. My mother's family, having farmed the fields in Northern Ireland and come to Canada to farm the fields, and then migrated to the United States to also farm in Ohio. This is a series that I started last year, the Goddess series, and I went to Ireland and I just literally discovered a petroglyph from 5,000 years ago, and I am now in the Registry of Monuments for Ireland. And that's the pattern that you could just barely see water etched into these pieces. And the series that this is from my Spaces Within series that I began in Australia in 2017. And I went to learn how to coil build. I realize I've chosen a piece that is slab built to show you here, but I went to learn how to coil build. And while I was in Australia, I was there for 3 months. I had the opportunity to travel to the interior and meet with a Hermannsburg Aboriginal peoples potters community. And I saw them at that time painting their stories on their pots. And that also was extremely influential in my drive to tell my ancestors' stories through ceramics. After I finished my MFA at OCAD, I went to a program for newly minted ceramics graduates in Denmark. And I've written the word down because your guess is as good as mine, but my pronunciation would be Guygal. That was a transformative situation for me, where I had not done multiple piece mold making, I had not done slip casting, and I began to slip cast. And I literally, for the first time, cut out images and pasted them onto Limoges porcelain, as it happens in this case, in a drive to, again, look at self-representation, body mimesis, body and soul. And then I had a period of physical challenge with my body for about a year and a half. And coming out of that, this is the first piece that I made. And I think you can see that it's an expression of kind of feeling boxed in and caged in and limited by your physical vessel. And those are images of me. So I started working with image at that time. So this is 2014, 2015. Now we're moving into 2016, where I wanted to document my father's body because I knew his life was coming to its close. And he allowed me to photograph him at close up. And that's when I really started to think about that sepia tone is an archival image. And I found these memory images, which were difficult to find because my father was an amateur photographer and very few photographs of him. So this is a documentation of his life and his story, which is currently up at the Workers' Arts and Heritage Center in Hamilton. And the opening is March 22nd, if you know anyone in the area. Okay. This piece I created for Canada's sesquicentennial. I was wanted to sort of locate myself in the diaspora, in the Canadian, as a Canadian. And if you look closely, you can see in the corners on some of the pieces, I have my own personal archive of pictures of me as a little girl doing Canadian things, like learning ballet or to skate or visiting Anne of Green Gables or cooking lobster. I grew up on the East Coast. And on the facets are the kind of iconic Canadian imagery that surrounded me and sort of were prevalent. And then pushing the boundaries of this notion of archive and image, I created a game for myself where the form influenced the message and the meaning of the sculpture, and building blocks where every image has an equal number of my mother's family's photographs and my father's family's photographs. No image could be taken after I was born. And in fact, in here we have images that date back to my very first ancestor who came from Ireland and Runia. Also before I created the hanging mobile, no, sorry, after I created the hanging mobile, which I called Body Interrupted, I created this house of cards to document my father's lived experience of being an immigrant and the precarity of coming as a person of color in the 1950s to Canada to settle and to build a home. My parents in 1956. I also had the good fortune to have access to do research at the Art Gallery of Ontario, and they had recently acquired the Montgomery Collection, which is the largest collection of West Indian photographic ephemera, or image ephemera, because it's all kinds of photographic documentation. And so as I was doing that, I started to realize that I wanted to create this work, and I called it Division, because I wanted to show the difference between what would have been in the drawing rooms of the plantation owners at the time. As you can see, the chandeliers, the grand piano, the room divider. And so I had these prefabricated room dividers where I put on the porcelain tiles and the lived experience of the indentured workers in the panes, bringing their experience into the homes of the plantation owners. And I was lucky enough to be invited to tour the show, that piece in a show in the US with some fairly big artists. You may recognize Simone Lee and Magdalena Dundo there. Also, Ai Weiwei was in this show, and Theaster Gates. So that was pretty spectacular. Highlight for me. And in 2020, the government of Trinidad and Tobago released for the first time the images of the archival images of the ship's manifest, the first ship that sailed from Calcutta to Trinidad, and that was in 1845. And here's the manifest, or one of the pages of the manifest. And as soon as I saw that, I just knew I had to give it legs. I had to do something. I had to create something with it, and I wanted to put them on the sails of the ship. And really, it was just I had to do it, and I didn't make it for anything or anyone or any show or anybody to ever see. I just had to make this piece, and here it is. And then the body. I mean, it's obviously not an exact replica, but the portholes are the coins of that were in circulation in 1845 in India, Britain, and in the West Indies. And that is the other piece that was acquired by the Royal Ontario Museum. So a couple of years later, well, I guess in 2019, I went to Medalta, which is really a mecca for ceramic artists in Canada. It's in Medicine Hat, Alberta. I went in the coldest winter on record in 2019, and had a 3.5 hour tour of the brickworks there. And 3 years later, I'm just going to play for you a walkthrough of the show that came about. And as I'm walking you through, I'm just going to tell you about what you're seeing. Is that going to work? Yeah. So these are larger than life architectural bricks. And each side of them, there's an archival image. So I dove into the archives and I was, again, there was a personal connection there is that my father, in his summers, when he first came to Canada, worked as a brick mason for Stelco in Hamilton. And he was placed in the furnace alongside the Black Caribbean, other Canadian immigrants at the time, because the prevailing belief was that the darker your skin, the more heat you could withstand. And so when I was standing there in 2019, this hit me, and I was really feeling the intensity and the difficulty of the work. And in fact, the foreman who was giving us the tour said, yes, many workers started and never came back after one day. Okay, we have some cat bombing going on again. All right, we'll just persist and I will show you this is where I first started with augmented reality, and I hired an animation artist, Kira Vlietsta, and each side of the brick has a 20 or 30 or 40-second little animation that is triggered by the app. And I just show you the first one I did. It gives you a sense of looking at erasure and where were the Chinese and the indigenous and the Japanese and the other people of color that were not visible in this very important industry. So I was invited to create a piece in response to the Biennale Internationale du Lin de Pont-Neuf in Quebec. And as I mentioned, my mother's family were flax farmers in Northern Ireland. And this is a piece that is an abstraction of the jacquard loom that was central to the linen industry in the 19th century. Also on at the Workers' Arts and Heritage Center in Hamilton. And I made this piece for that exhibition, which responds to the House of Cards of my father's life. This is called Housework, and a documentation of the different roles that my mother assumed in her life. And we're coming to an end. This is a very recent work that I'm just packing up to take with me to Salt Lake City for the National Council on the Education of Ceramic Arts Indian diaspora show Sangha. And it's similar, but a much smaller scale and a more personal tone. I call it Homelands, double-sided with sort of evoking the cyanotype China, blue, porcelain, and the voyage, and the journey and the map of New Brunswick, and my personal story and my father's story on the other side. So I'm going to wrap up by preempting a question that is often asked, which is what's next? Because I just want to let you know that at the moment I'm wrestling with creating work that responds to my discovery shortly before my mother passed, that my father was involved in the Sir George Williams race riots in Montreal of 1969. And just in short, if you're not familiar with that incident, and certainly we're not taught it in our curriculum, 10 Black Trinidadian students accused a white professor of academic racism, and it ended up in a large riot, over 100 arrests, and an international incident. And I found out that my father spoke on behalf of the white professor, who's in this photograph, which I found in my father's album, and that they were best friends during their PhD studies. So that's a rather complex and difficult and challenging idea to get around, but I'm looking at the notions of allyship and um, and and race and racism and racial tensions and the history of racism in Canada. So that's all I have to say, and I am going to hand it back to you for questions.
I was wondering about if you could explain more about the patterning on the artwork coinage. There was a whole bunch of each individual coin was a different pattern. And I was wondering if you could talk more about your choices for the patterning on coinage.
Sure. Well, first of all, constructing them, I probably made about 8 or 9, and then chose the best ones in the right sizes to include in the installation. And I worked rather intuitively so they're made out of stoneware, and I had in front of me a whole bunch of different liquid porcelain, which I had stained with different colors. And I did work rather intuitively, but I also was thinking about the voyage, and I was thinking about the Kalapani, the black waters, which is what the West Indians sort of call the waters of the ocean of the voyage. And so, the central piece has tones of blacks and dark blues and so on. And I'm trying to remember myself what some of them have tones of the sugar cane reaching up. I think it's a golden one with the green cane. The one on the far left, the large piece on the far left, has very identifiably British iconic like pattern or symbol that might have been on the wallpaper in a high-end home at the time, and then sort of water washed over it. And so they're not, it's not a one-on-one kind of storytelling, but more the feeling of, and also the weight. I mean, I made them large, and there is also kind of the relationship to the weight and the heaviness and I also enlarged them to give them import. And it's very few pieces left of Indo-indentured silver jewelry. And as Lancelyn mentioned, most of it was melted down because people wanted to sort of distance themselves. But the coins themselves, she only had one piece with one coin, one single coin. Yeah, it was actually illegal to make jewelry out of coins, so very little of it survived.
Do you see the coins as like a taking back of a story, or like a reclaiming, like how, like, just talk to me a little bit about the jewelry, because the jewelry, gets handed down, from generations to generation. I myself in my South Asian, Sikh family have been given jewelry, right? And my younger years, I was like, oh, I didn't really like it. I want to melt it down and do something else with it. But can you talk to me about what that, that kind of reclaiming means? And especially in relation to your grandma's photograph that sort of starts us, or your great grandmother, right?
Great.
Too great. Yeah. That sort of sets us off, right? Like sets this sort of whole wave of art and art practice, into all these wonderful pieces that you've put together. But it's really that one photograph of this jewelry that sort of like is the driving force.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack in that question, but one of the things that I didn't mention when I was talking about it is the importance of the jewelry as a symbol of power and strength of the women, because in fact it was the women who fought for better working conditions and to eliminate child labor, and the women were the instigators. They were the activists, and the symbol of the wrist with the bangle is a symbol of strength and power and female power. So there's that, and the handing down. I mean, I have a gold bangle, and many people have gold bangles. Not many have silver. And yeah, there is this tradition of handing down jewelry. And even I think I mentioned in my opening remarks, even my wedding band was handed down to my father from his father as the eldest in the family. And I have subsequently learned that the reason it has a Jewish, like a Hebrew inscription on it is because many Jews fled during in the face of the Holocaust to the Caribbean. So, but the handing down of jewelry is important. And I would direct you to listen to the rest of Ramabai's talk about herself, where she discusses her jewelry yes, there's a couple of other women in the installation who specifically talk about their jewelry, their grandmothers, their great grandmothers' jewelry, and handing it down and wanting to hand it down to their daughters. So, I mean, there's a lineage, and I think we're at a moment of reclamation where maybe a generation ago we might have not be talking about this with any kind of pride, but now we're wearing our jewelry and reclaiming the histories and the power and the kind of really the feminist lens of this history.
Are you able to read the question here? They said, hi, I have a question. I'm wondering about your use of ceramics, particularly use of porcelain as a substance, photo transfers, as well as the use of augmentation reality to have your subject stories heard. More succinctly, what is the relationship between the subjects you explore and the media you use?
Okay, yeah. So ceramics is the medium that called me when I became an artist in a very visceral way. And you know, the reason I wanted to do the Illuminated series and the Lightbox series, the Holding Ancestry series, and the reason I was able to do it was because ceramics, so porcelain as a medium, has the quality of translucence, and I was literally able to shed light and to highlight, to illuminate their lives. So, I mean, yes, I suppose you could use plastic or some other materials, but the materiality of the ceramics, not only is it translucent, it's also ceramics is one of the most permanent materials in history of humankind, and traces history of humankind, but at the same time, it's extremely fragile and can be easily broken and shattered. And that's a really lovely tension in the medium itself. So I was thinking about all those things when I was creating the House of Cards and Illuminated and working with imagery on porcelain. Yeah.
We have another question here too. I think it's Diana Thornycroft. I'm the coordinator of the Flash Photography Festival, and I want to comment about the amazing photographs you've shown, how the first image triggered this remarkable work. Yes, yeah. The last image you showed is of your father, and it too seems to indicate another body of work that you will follow. No question, just wanted to note how important visual documentation is in this work. Thanks for the comment. But yeah, it is about that first photograph, that you kind of get stuck in your head, and you have to do something with it, much like the ship's manifest and onto sails. But sometimes you get those moments where you're just like, something has to happen with this, I have to do something with this. Thank you, Diana, for that comment.
Can I just say, if the last part of the question might be interpreted as how important is photography in the new body of work that I'm making? And yeah. So the response to that is extremely important, to the point where I've actually decided to move. I am making ceramic abstract installations, but I am going to recreate, I'm going to do photographic collage of archival imagery, and I'm steeped in images at the moment, and just starting to work at that, and getting access to information, requests fulfilled, and you know, getting the blueprints for buildings and so on and so forth. And I'm going to create to scale window photographic images for the installation. So photography is becoming more and more important to me, because I really feel that image has a lot of power to evoke, has an equal amount of power to evoke response from the public, and manipulating and working with image. So I'm looking forward to that.
Diana, I'm sorry, I'm reading the comments just because I don't know if everyone can see them, but Diana has responded and said, "Name of your show in our festival is so exciting." So
Thank you.
fantastic. Yeah. Are there any questions from the class here? You have to speak up a bit so that people
Yeah,
can hear.
hopefully you can hear me okay. I'm just wondering, when you're dealing with old family photos, you probably have limited choices for how you can represent the person that you want to represent. I'm wondering if there are any challenges that you came across where you've limited by aesthetic choices that were made by the photographer, or maybe also you want.
Okay. There was a critical thing you said that I missed. Can you summarize the question?
Yeah, the question is, Travis, just if I got it right, the question is, are you limited by the choice of photographs that you have, your family? How do you choose which photographs to use? And are you limited by the choice that the photographer made in taking that photograph?
Right. Well, so intersubjectivity and what you see and being seen, and looking at and really watching an image are all ideas. I would encourage you to look at Ariella Azoulay, who has written The Civil Contract around being photographed and taking a photograph and seeing and being seen. These are all ideas that I was grappling with. And certainly, yes, there's a finiteness to what is available to me in my personal archive. I have found out things that it is, what's legal, what's not legal, what can I reproduce, what can I not reproduce. Just like in the music industry, or, there are certain rules and restrictions and permissions and so on involved. I'm not sure if I've answered all parts of that question, but yeah. Did I answer all parts of the question?
Yeah, you got a thumbs up. I'm struck by the postcards, actually, because the fact that these women, I'm like in the show that's downstairs at Gallery 1 CO3, the illumination, the postcards, the fact that these postcards are taken without these women's consent, and then shown around, right? Like sent off, as there's just something so wrong is probably the word I'm going to use here, but just that their images are used as a way to colonize, right? To colonize the landscape.
And I'm not sure that they were taken without their consent, but certainly they stripped them of their identity.
Yeah, I guess I'm imagining postcards, even if you pay, a little bit of money for a postcard. I mean, I'm making an assumption here that they weren't receiving that, right? They
Yeah.
weren't receiving those funds. They weren't, like their image is on the postcard, but they're representing, Trinidad, but they were not gaining income from that. That's my assumption. Maybe I don't think I'm wrong, but
Yeah, that's my assumption as well. So I haven't read otherwise. So yeah. No, there's an exploitation that is egregious. Absolutely. It's yeah. And also there's some of the photographs, for sure the photographers dress them up with more jewelry. For sure the photographers, stage them in more exotic ways than they would normally be dressed. Yeah, absolutely. It was overwhelming because to me to understand what was behind the photograph, or the civil contract of that photograph, um really to look to because when you first glance at those, if you know no context, you're like, oh, those are nice. They're pretty. Really, there's not they don't have they don't have a voice of their own, those images. They're out there and they can't represent themselves. You know what I mean? Yeah.
yeah. Sorry, I'm doing two things. My students are pointing out that Shanila is asking a question here, and Shanila has written the essay that is
Yes.
gallery as well.
Thank you.
That's written. Hi, Heidi. Thank you for your lovely talk. I'm so happy to have been able to attend this one. As an Indo-Caribbean woman, I appreciate your curiosity in bringing the subject matter to the surface for the art canon. Doing my own research and watching your presentation, it struck me how much institutional access that you need to have to even access this information. Just thought that it was interesting. It was an interesting parallel, and I'm wondering if you might have some commentary about that in the future.
Right. Well, I mean, institutional access.
I'm guessing that maybe some of the archives are, you'd have to go to Archive Canada, having things online. So you may have access, but you might not know that they're there.
Well, and it's true. Okay, well, so the Art Gallery of Ontario, if you request in advance, they will give you access. It's their job. But in terms of personal archive, I have a cousin who's at least a generation older than me in the UK who traveled during COVID to Guyana and got the emigration passes of our ancestors. And that's how I actually had to re-record my video of myself placing myself in the diaspora because the story changed. Runia's story changed recently because he was able to prove that, in fact, our family was not Afghani heritage, but were Hindus, low caste untouchables, because he went to the archives physically in Georgetown, Guyana, because they aren't available online. And yeah, so I do hope in the future to get to Trinidad, to Port of Spain, to the archive, because there is some question as to whether my father's maternal ancestor is actually on the sails of that ship that I created on that manifest. There's, in fact, things are pointing more and more towards that being true, but I don't have immediate access to confirm that. But we are working towards it, and it looks possible that Etwaria Synonym was on that boat. And that she is my father's maternal ancestor who came to Trinidad. So institutional access, I think it's more, I think, Shanila, I appreciate your question. I think one of the things you might be touching upon is access for recognition. I'm the first Indo-Caribbean contemporary artist to be acquired by a major Canadian gallery or museum, period. The London Museum just had a show last year on indentureship. There was a show on Caribbean indentureship in New York 2 years ago. We're just starting. We're just beginning to have access to mainstream institutional platforms to tell our stories.
And Shanila's written, yes, I was also thinking about how you have to go to Trinidad to find the physical papers, right? So you need funds to get there as
Yes,
well.
you do. Yeah.
And time. Yeah.
Yeah.
We're having a chuckle at your cat behind you.
I have two rambunctious Bengals. I did actually feed them before we started, but
no, they know what they're doing. Well, thank you, Heidi, for all of that. That's absolutely wonderful. And thank you for sharing the work. And, it's still filled downstairs at Gallery 1C03. So I highly recommend everybody, being able to go down there and walk through and really take in the exhibit. So thank you so much. Thank you, everyone online, and Jennifer and Evan, who are working behind the scenes here, and also our ASL interpreter. Thank you for doing that work.
thank you. Thank you very much for being here, and thank you for the opportunity.